This is Mr. Beck Does Your Homework. This is physics homework number 5, questions number 12 and 13, a two-part question. This says a sailboat starts from rest. Starts from rest. That means that my initial velocity is 0 meters per second. Starts from rest and accelerates at a rate of 0.31 meters per second squared. So my acceleration is 0.31 meters per second squared. Over a distance of 290 meters. Over a distance of 290 meters. Find the magnitude, positive value, of the boat's final velocity. So I want my final velocity. Now, initial velocity, acceleration, displacement, final velocity. Looks like, again, I'm using this equation that's v squared equals v0 squared plus 2ax. Notice there's no time in this equation. There's no time considered over here. So when I plug in my numbers, I'm going to wind up being able to solve for my final velocity. So v squared equals v0 squared, which is 0 squared, so that's easy, plus twice my acceleration, 0.31, times 290 meters. So when I solve for this and take a square root, my velocity is going to be the square root of 2 times 0.31, 0.31 times 290. And that will give me my final velocity. Part 2 of 2, question 13 says, how long does it take the boat to travel this distance? So what I'm looking for in part 2 is the time. Time equals question mark. Now, as I've done before, I'm going to take a look and see if I can find an equation that has time, initial velocity, acceleration, and displacement. Now, of course, you could use your final velocity, any equation with time and final velocity, because you know it now. But instead of using this, which might have some rounding errors or something in it, I sometimes want to just start off with an equation that has these 4 variables. So what equation doesn't have the final velocity? It tells me that my equation number 3 says my position is my initial velocity times time plus 1/2 my acceleration times time squared. This will allow me to solve for time. Now, if you're paying attention and you've been good at math and you remember the quadratic equation, you will see that this very well could be quadratic because I've got something times t squared and something times t, and this could be a mess. But in this case, since my initial velocity is 0, this term is going to drop out, so I'm not going to wind up with a quadratic. If you do wind up with a quadratic, you should rest assured that I'm not going to ask you any question that requires you to use a quadratic, but you could either use the quadratic formula for it, or you could solve for something else and then plug it in. So I'm going to recommend that you do that instead of this. But in this case, let's see what happens. X is v0t plus 1/2 at squared. Well, my position, I know, is 290. My initial velocity is 0, so I've got 0 times time, so that goes away, plus 1/2 my acceleration, 0.31 times time squared times t squared. So this is going to work out just fine. Multiply by 2, divide by 0.31, and I'll get t squared equals some number. And then when I square root both sides, I'm going to wind up with t equals, and this is just math. So if you do wind up facing a quadratic, just know that there's probably a better way around it, and use your final velocity and plug it in, or whichever variable is missing. There are some other tricks with this that we'll get into later.